The evils of the African slave trade on whites. Now, hopefully we know about the evils perpetuated on African slaves. That is literally horrific. And I know it's easy to discount. Like, you're going to have a lot of black guys who say, oh, and it's evil, evil, evil. And you're saying, I don't know, man. They seem to have an agenda. The nice thing about reading this book from C.L.R. Lewis, or C.L.R. James, excuse me, C.L.R. Lewis, is that he cites a lot of, this is written in the 1930s, and he cites a lot of white Europeans from France, another guy from Hungary, Emile Torde, who had done a lot of travel into Africa. It's so he's not citing, black rabble rousers today. Yeah, there's tons of these guys. Now the Colin Kaepernick, that's just an example. I mean, he's fake. I get it, but there's lots of the Ibrahim Kendis and not the just lots of guys. The academics are like, and I was like, yeah, I don't know if I trust you because you always have an agenda as a grifter. My man here did not, and this is actually the black Jacobins of and basically the Toussaint Louverture and the San Domingo Revolution. I think is like the first and only really successful slave revolt in history, and it's such a wonderful book. I'm not even halfway done, not even a third done yet, but I'm just reading it. I'm just like, wow. Not only was it evil perpetuated on blacks, of which is that's first and foremost a horror. It's horrible. These freaking scumbags who did this to human beings, But the whites suffered as well, man. They did. And to sit there and discount, I think a lot of whites do, the slave trade because, you get tired of it. You're like, okay, look, as a white guy, I'm sitting there thinking, I get it, man. I'm actually sympathetic. But stop this freaking continually focus on this when you have everything right here in your palm of your hand in America. You get so we're being browbeaten so much. It's just like I didn't have anything to do with it. But you guys, all these professors and these grifters, the Robin DiAngelo's, whites, most of them are white, by the way. I can't take it. So you want to discount it because you feel like there is a line being drawn. But yet you can't. Because there's a horrific history that goes with this stuff. And yes, it affected blacks horrifically, but also affected whites. I'm going to read you this. This is oh man, I love this book. It's so freaking fantastic. All right. Of the three San Domingo planters, British bourgeois and French bourgeois, the first and more important were the planters of the San Domingo. He's going to talk about the owners. There's three groups of owners of the slaves. All right. On such a soil as San Domingo slavery, only a vicious society could flourish. Oh my goodness. All right, so we're going to read. He talks about what happens in San Domingo in terms of the climate, geography of it all. And then he goes into this. The traveler from Europe was enchanted at his first glimpse of this paradise in the West Indies, in which the ordered beauty of agriculture and the prodigality of nature competed equally for his surprise and admiration. But it was monotonous, year in, year out, day after day. It was the same, a little greener in the wet season and a little browner in the dry. The wilder scenery was constantly magnificent, but in the colonist who had seen the same domestic landscape from his earlier hour, it awakened little response. To the emigrant, who was at first charmed and exhilarated, monotony bred indifference, which could develop into active dislike and the longing for the seasons returning with the year. Oh. Man, when I lived in Arizona, I cannot tell you how much I was like, dude, this is great. It's sunny all the time. It's nice at first, no snow, but after a while, it's just boring. It makes you soft. There's no other way around that. All right. The planters hated the life, the owners essentially, and sought only to make enough money to retire to France or at least spend a few months in Paris in luxury and the amenities of civilization. With so much to eat and drink, there was a lavish hospitality which had remained a tradition, but the majority of the great houses, contrary to legend, were poorly furnished, and their owners looked on them as rest houses as the intervals to get back to Paris. Seeking to overcome their abundant leisure and boredom with food, drink, dice, and black women, They had long before 1789 lost the simplicity of life and rude energy of those nameless men who had laid the foundations of the colony. I hope the nameless men who fought for our freedom in war, in the Civil War, but in the Revolutionary War, who laid the foundation for us to freaking gripe so much. The women, this is white women now, were subjected to the same evil influences, In the early years of the colony, they had been imported like slaves and machinery. Most of the first arrivals were the sweepings of the Paris gutter, bringing to the island, quote, bodies as corrupt as their manners and serving only to infect the colony, unquote. Another official, asking for a woman, begged the authorities not to send the ugliest they could find in the hospitals. As late as 1743, an official in San Domingo was complaining that France still sent girls whose aptitude for generation was for the most part destroyed by too great usage. Whose aptitude for generation, to have babies, was destroyed by great usage of being just abused, raped, prostituted. This is a Catholic society in France, by the way. Crazy. All right, let's keep going. One of the most distinguished colonial historians, Moreau of Saint Marie, admits that the streets were sewers and the people threw all their garbage into them. The government begged people in vain not to commit nuisance in the street. Be careful of the disposition of your fecal matter, not to let sheep, pigs, and goats wander loose, but no one paid any attention to that. Despite repeated prohibitions, they continued to beat their slaves in the public streets. Nor were the authorities themselves more careful. If it rained at night, one could not walk in town the next day, and streams of water filled the ditches at the side of the streets with fecal matter. All right, let's keep going. What the towns lacked in intellectual fare, they made up for in opportunities of debauchery. Gambling dens for everyone in San Domingo played, and great fortunes were won and lost in a few days. Dance halls, private brothels, whereby the mulatto women lived in such comfort and luxury that in 1789, of 7,000 mulatto women in San Domingo, 5,000 were either prostitutes or kept the mistresses of white men. The regular clergy of San Domingo, instead of being a moderating influence, were notorious for their irreverence and degeneracy. In the early years, they consisted chiefly of unfrocked monks. Later came a better class of priests, but in that turgid, overheated society, few were able to withstand the temptations of easy money, easy living, and easy women. Many of them, these are priests now, openly lived with their concubines. Their greed for money led them to exploit the Negroes with the same ruthlessness as the rest of white San Domingo. About the middle of the 18th century, one of them used to baptize the same Negroes every 7 or 8 times for the ceremony and abuse the slaves, and they were willing to pay a small sum for each baptism. As late as 1790, another was competing with the Negro obeah men for the coppers of the slaves by selling charms against the illnesses and talismans to assure the success of their petty ventures. The evil debauchery. And the funny thing is, this guy. Let's read real quick. Hold on a second. I'm gonna find a way because I love about this book because he talks about the difference between the slavers, the freaking slave trade, freaking scumbags, and just the regular people. In the towns, the great merchants and the wealthy agents of the maritime bourgeois were included with the planters as big whites. On the plantations, the managers and the stewards were either agents of the absentee owner or under the eye of the planter himself and therefore subordinate. These in the country, in the towns, the small lawyers, the notaries, the clerks, the artisans, the grocers were known as the small whites. Included among the small whites was a crowd of city vagabonds, fugitives from justice, escaped galley slaves, debtors unable to pay their bills. So basically he's saying there is the whites, and he talks about the whites from Europe being slaved and sent to San Domingo, not as indentured servants, as slaves, but they couldn't deal with the heat because they're from the north. And at some point the slaver said, these guys are no good, we're going to go over here to Africa. These small whites should not be confused with the modern poor whites in America or South Africa. Some of these, especially in America, live in a standard almost as low as that of the Negroes in their community. So he's not sitting there saying all blacks have it are below whites. He says tons of poor whites too. And the slave trade, and just when I talked to my man Phil Lee, who had written the book Southern Reconstruction, again, once it shows you again how they freaking divided and conquered to pit whites against blacks, even though the bourgeois, the planters, the owners were the ones on the debauchery, the priests, the pastors. It's so flippin' frustrating. Because the whites said, look, man, as long as these blacks are below me, I can be poor. I just don't want to be the lowest on the totem pole. And they fell for it. And the planters and stuff said, yeah, man, you don't want to be the lowest on the totem pole. You should focus your hostility not towards us, of course, but out towards those people. And the blacks like, dude, I didn't even come here on my own accord. I was rounded up as slave herd, a shadow of slavery. I don't want to be here any more than you want me here, poor white. But I can't leave because I'm literally a piece of property owned by those fools over there. And this is exactly what's happening today. Divide and conquer. Put red versus blue, black versus white, Christian versus Muslim, as opposed to focusing on the lessons of the past, man. Look, and this is not to discount the horrors that freaking Africans had. I've done. Anyone said just get the hell out of here. I'm just trying to say it's not just as simple as blacks and whites. It's more than that. The values that were perpetuated on whites created evil as well as the slaves that were perpetuated on blacks. No other way around that, as we just saw right there. All right, I'll put a link to the show notes for your book. I highly encourage you to get it. We'll see you.